Hey everyone, welcome to Blue Minds Think Alike. I'm Wade, and today is going to be part one of like two or three of me talking about Destiny. Um, so the way I kind of want to structure this is I'm gonna be kind of going through like a timeline. So it's talking about the timeline of the series, talking about some of like the important parts and why I like them. Um, because there is a lot to get through, I may kind of rush over some parts or not go like too in depth because this thing is already going to be long enough as is, and I don't want to make it any longer than it has to. Um, but anyway, without a doubt, or without further ado is the right term, I think. Let's get started. Okay, so before we kind of get into like the timeline of the games, there's going to be, I would say a little bit of backstory, but it's honestly, it's kind of quite a lot. You have to understand what the world is of Destiny. Um, so Destiny is a video game series, well, series, but there's only two games in the series, technically, made by Bungie. And the gameplay is a first-person shooter that also deals with continuous life service. Um, the whole thing is basically you take the role of what's called a guardian, which is a person that has been chosen and raised by this god called the Traveler, to wield the Traveler's mystical light and defend humanity from various alien races throughout our solar system. So let's get a bit of insight sort of on what all these things are. First off, start with a bit of a history lesson, I'll say. So in roughly modern times, a lot of the exact timelines of like when specific things happen in Destiny isn't really set, or sorry, isn't really clear. But that's kind of part of the point, which it's not really meant to exactly be like clear or be specified. Partially because it doesn't specifically matter too much in the grand scheme of the story, and to explain it all properly would kind of take away from what the game was trying to focus on. But also, the fact that people like don't know when specific things happened kind of fits in with the whole like humanity on the verge of collapse sort of thing, but we'll get into that in a bit. So in roughly kind of present day times, humanity goes on a manned mission to Mars. And when they are there, they discover something incredible. They discover this giant machine god hovering in the skies of Mars, and they call it the Traveler. And what the Traveler, very little is known about the Traveler, but what it is this giant white machine sphere the size of a small moon. Like as you can see, in the thing behind me, um, the little, well, okay, well, I'm pointing at my screen here, but the thing kind of like hanging in the sky, that is the Traveler. Now, the scale isn't very right, but as the size of a normal three normal people, you can see the Traveler is not definitely not as big as like Earth's moon, not even close. Um, but like it is this kind of the size of a small moon. It is massive. Um, and it is a giant machine. Now, the Traveler is worshipped and has been worshipped by many civilizations as a god because it does have some sort of consciousness or sentience. Um, through various what humanity has discovered through various like other alien races that have come to the solar system, um and various, and like looking through their religious texts about the Traveler and things they call it. um the Traveler, what it has done is it would like through over the course of millions and millions of eons, the the traveler will basically find civilization, bless it with its light and its technology, and then after a time, it just leaves. It leaves their world, and it's gone. And so, but that I'm getting ahead of myself. So humanity is on Mars and they discover the traveler, and it propels humanity into what is called the Golden Age. Impossibly advancements are made in all sorts of things. The average lifespan of a human triples. Humanity is instantly propelled into this giant like spacefaring civilization. Mars, Venus, Mercury, pretty much every celestial body in the solar system is colonized. Saturn, everything is colonized. Human lifespan is tripled. Like pretty much any disease ever is just eradicated. It's basically a utopia. Things are perfect. Humans live for multiple centuries. Disease and stuff is non-existent. And yeah. However, this golden age would not last because the traveler has an enemy called the darkness. And the darkness is kind of what it sounds like, but also not. The darkness is this mysterious, unknowable, infinite vast force that seeks to destroy the traveler and seeks to destroy all things in the universe. And eventually, the darkness finds the traveler on Earth. And a great battle between the traveler and the darkness takes place. This event, this conflict between the traveler, this machine god, which think about the traveler doesn't speak necessarily. It doesn't like speak or directly converse or communicate as we would. It sort of like communicates with actions, like, oh, it comes to the solar system and just like blesses humanity with this technology, with the ability to do these things because of what the traveler is. And so it does that. And it creates the golden age. When the darkness finally comes, that ends the golden age and it creates an event called the collapse, which is this giant network of like this giant spacefaring civilization that humanity has become throughout the solar system. Is kind of just brought crashing down because the darkness is a vastly overpowered and overwhelming enemy. It's not necessary to say that like humanity was defenseless, no, because during the golden age, not only was it like things like science, human lifespan, and things like that were advanced, it was also weaponry. Actually, one of the major things that was created was this thing called the war mind, aptly named Rasputin. And Rasputin is an artificial intelligence that controls pretty much an entire solar system wide defense network. Using these things called warsats, which are these giant satellites that basically have Death Star beams on each of them. Might as well be. Scout the solar system, and this is giant planetary defense network, all controlled by Rasputin. There are these things called the Exos, which the Exos are basically robots, robotic people. They look like people. They're like the same size and general shape as people, but they're robotic. There was a man named Clovis Bray, who initially was kind of one of the lead designers, and his family was the ones who made Rasputin. One of the things he wanted to do was sort of, through the light, he wanted to achieve immortality, but instead he ended up sort of creating it. Now, there was a place during this all kind of took place during the Golden Age. There's a place called the Deep Stone Crypt. In the Deep Stone Crypt, throughout the story of Disney has kind of become like a place of myth because the Deep Stone Crypt was where the Exos were created. Now, what the Exos were, and I'm sure as I'm saying all this stuff in the episode, I'll be getting some stuff wrong. I'll probably correct myself in the future episode. But the Exos are sort of like I said, it's a robotic human-like body. What a person would do is they sort of like upload or copy themselves into this robotic body, and they'd be in that body now. And they sort of are immortal, but it's not necessarily a perfect transition. One of the most famous exos in Destiny is this someone who for now we will call the Exo Stranger, because that's actually what we are introduced to them as. We learn more about her later on in the series, but we'll get to that when the time comes. But the Exo Stranger, one of the things we reveal is that when she became an Exo, certain memories of her life were kind of lost. And like there are certain tidbits that and like certain downsides to becoming an Exo. It's a whole thing. But that's kind of like a loss of happens during the Golden Age. And so to get back to my point about the collapse with the darkness coming, humanity was not defenseless. We had the Exos, we had the War Mind, and we had just the general vast knowledge of the trap, and we had the Traveler itself. The Traveler itself did fight back, and despite all the best efforts, everything collapsed, hence the term the collapse. There are sort of two there's several main things about the collapse. Well, sorry, about collapse as now. What I have to say is at the beginning of the story, the collapse is kind of shrouded in mystery. A lot of answers aren't really given about what exactly happened or who was fighting for who exactly. As you play through the games more and more of that stuff is revealed. But what we do know is that there's various alien races that kind of accompany this force of the darkness. There's the Fallen, or they're also called the Elixni, and they are basically these four-armed. It's a race of like four-armed kind of scavengers who like scavenge and take scrap from pretty much anything and everything they can find, be it older ships, newer ships that they managed to take over, kill the crew, and steal the technology. Yeah. There are the Hive, which are these like weird, almost insectoid bug chitin things. It's kind of difficult to describe the Hive, but it's a race of various things that sometimes they also called the Krill, which is kind of what they used to be before they became the Hive. It's a long story. But they're basically a race that they use weird, like, forbidden magics to cast spells and do weird rituals to empower themselves, to empower their abilities, to just cause eternal bloodshed and blood tribute to their gods. There are the Cabal, which is a sort of like it's basically an entire race of these giant militaristic humanoids. They pretty much have an entire. It's not military dictatorship is probably the wrong word, but mostly because of the word dictatorship, they have an emperor or an empress, but pretty much their entire society is militaristic in every way. And the whole thing about the Cabal is their homeworld was destroyed by the Hive. And so they kind of, as with most of the other races in Destiny, have kind of been scavengers around the solar system, found their way to the Sol system, and been embroiled in this whole conflict with humanity and the Traveler. And so there's all these different races that are accompanying darkness to destroy humanity, and humanity is pretty much destroyed. However, before like and several things happen. The most important thing is the creation of what are called the Awoken. Now, one thing you have to understand about the Traveler is that it's not strictly like a machine god, it's also sort of a mystical god as well, because it is a machine by all intents and purposes, as you can kind of see in the video, it's a giant machine, but it also wields this ability called the Light. And the Light is a sort of mystical paracausal force that can bend the laws of the universe, defy physics. It can spontaneously create life, it can spontaneously destroy life. And through sort of the uses of the light, it's not really explained like explicitly, but again, it's not really in a weird way too prevalent or necessary to know that info. But it's kind of through that humanity was able to create all these things during the Golden Age. So going back to what I said about the Awoken were created when, during the collapse, a ship carrying several hundred people were basically sucked into this wormhole. And now this darkness carried its own sort of form of energy called the darkness. And when it was combined with the Traveler's Light, it basically created a wormhole that sucked this ship sort of into a pocket dimension. And in this dimension, time basically passed like faster than the speed of sound. And through the weird combination of these various paracausal energies transformed the very essence of what these humans were. They became the first Awoken. Now, Awoken are very similar to humans, but their skin is like all this like pale blue. They live for an extremely long time. They live for like millions and millions of years. But and they have sort of a easier connection to some of these paracausal abilities, depending sort of on how they're attempting to access it, and depending on kind of person to person. Another thing that happens during the collapse is humanity is basically at the brink of extinction, but the Traveler sort of sacrifices itself, but also doesn't. Basically, so the Traveler is this inscrutable machine god, and it doesn't really kind of obey by the standard laws of like life and death. It kind of transcends those concepts. Basically, the Traveler, whereas before it had kind of always, when any time this darkness would come to find it, it would just flee. For whatever reason, the Traveler stayed and fought. And in the process, the Traveler was crippled. As you can see in the picture, there seems to be like damage to the bottom of the Traveler, pieces of it are missing. Prior to the collapse, the Traveler was a full, complete sphere. But during the collapse, it was damaged and was crippled, and it hung dormant in the sky above Earth. But in doing so, it kind of sacrificed itself to drive away the darkness. And a lot of these forces, a lot of the Hive, the Fallen, the Cabal, and sort of ended the collapse. Now, and this brought about the Dark Age, which is sort of the years following the collapse. Now, at the end of the collapse, when the Traveler sacrificed itself to push away the darkness and push away all these dark forces and alien species, it did do one final thing. It created these things called the ghosts. Now, when I say ghost, I don't mean, oh, it's a spooky dead spirit that can walk through walls, not that type of thing. A ghost is a piece of the Traveler's light. And what a ghost does, it's a small, roughly the size of, I don't know, an apple, a small fruit, a floating like hunk of metal that kind of just floats through the air. And what it does is a ghost creates the ability. A ghost has the ability to bestow upon someone the traveler's light, thereby creating what is called a guardian. What the ghost does is it finds someone who's died, finds a corpse somewhere, and it basically just resurrects that person. Their body is fully restored, um, and they're back at full health. But doing so, it erases that person's memories. The person has no memories of their life beforehand. Um, and the ghost does not know who they are either. But what happens is this person, now a guardian or sometimes called a light bearer, is now blessed with the traveler's lights. And what this means is they can wield the light as a weapon. Um, and it can take there's three different types of light. There's solar light, which is harnessing like the power of the sun to create flame. Basically, the whole thing solar and fire. There's arc light, which is all about sort of electricity. And then there's void light, which is all about dark matter. And the Guardians are able to wield this light as a weapon. It can be something from having a knife that's just made of pure fire that they throw at an enemy, and then the enemy catches on fire and explodes. They throw like a grenade that basically just sucks all the enemies near it in this like swirl of void energy. And after a moment, it like detonates itself, and any enemies that have been sucked in near it are vaporized. Um, and it was during this time, shortly after the collapse, when the Dark Age began, that the first light bearers were created. Now, during this time, because society had just kind of fallen, and all like kind of known forms of government and organized society were no more, the entire planet and sort of solar system kind of just became a barren wasteland of lawlessness. The first light bearers became roving warlords who would kind of just wander around and basically using their light. And another thing about the light is basically if a guardian or a light bearer is killed, the ghost just revives them right back. So you can't. It's very difficult to actually like permanently kill a light bearer. And so during the Dark Age, for a very for many years, it was just sort of these warlords preying around the remnants of humanity and basically being weird pseudo gods, depending on how you look at it. After some time, several light bearers who did not really agree with the sort of just lawlessness and ruthlessness of the warlords formed together to form what were called the Iron Lords. And the Iron Lords were light bearers who sort of fought against the warlords and fought against the tyranny and lawlessness the warlords had kind of created. And over many years, the warlords sought out and actually managed to kill several of the warlords. Basically, it's not impossible to kill a light bearer. There are many ways you can do it. It's just most conventional ways that we would think of killing a person don't really work against the light bearer, but it is possible through various different means that we'll get into eventually. And then basically the Iron Lords went around challenging all the different warlords to various forms of combat, and ended up in succeeding in defeating the warlords. And this took place over the course of several years, and other things were happening in the world during this time. Like the warlords didn't necessarily it wasn't less necessarily that the world's like controlled every part of the world. It was more of that they weren't able to like every part of the world they weren't always able to like watch or keep track of. And so there were things happening that either they weren't aware of or that wasn't a high priority for them, for the warlords. But eventually, after the darkness was expelled during the collapse in the Dark Age, the age of the Iron Lords and the Warlords, became the City Age, which is several survivors and roving groups of humans, the Awoken, who by this point had come back through this wormhole they'd gone through, and various Exo, came together to form what is called the Last City. And the Last City is, as it sounds, the last safe city on Earth. It's a city where the remnants of humanity can come together and thrive. They built it, the Traveler having still been hanging sort of dormant in the sky since the collapse. The Last City is built beneath the Traveler under its protection. Over several centuries, this last city would sort of become it would become several things. It became a symbol of humanity's ability to endure and survive despite all of the hardship that had happened to it by the hands of the darkness and the collapse. It would become sort of a haven for the remnants of humanity and the Awoken and the Exos that had survived all this time. And over time, as the days of the Dark Age came to an end, as a result of the influences of the Last City, the kind of attitude of the Light Bearers would change as well. Whereas previously, most Light Bearers were either warlords or these noble Iron Lords. Light Bearers kind of became assigned the term Guardian, and they were basically, as the name implies, sort of a guardian of the Last City. All these various alien threats that were coming by and trying to destroy humanity. And the Guardian's responsibility was to defend the Last City. And thank you so much for watching, everybody. I am going to cut the episode off here. We have gotten through most of the prologue backstory of this universe. When we come back next time for part 2, we are going to get into the actual story of the games themselves, once the player character enters this world. And I'm very excited to talk about it. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.